Hello there. Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. On this show, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games. Yes, and in today's episode, we continue our deep delve into Dungeons and Dragons with today's guest, Skaff Elias. Now, if you know Skaff, you're wondering, like, why are we talking to Skaff on a Dungeons and Dragons show? Because, you know, he's famous for Magic the Gathering, other trading card games. He's designed a bunch of card games and board games with Richard Garfield, you know, but you will not find Skaff's credits, you know, Skaff's name in the credits of hardly any D&D books anywhere. But that's because you don't know the whole story. So stay tuned and you will find out exactly why to tell these stories of Dungeons and Dragons. We had to have Skaff on the show. So Skaff, welcome to Fireside.
Hello, good to be here, or there, wherever
it is where we are at. So how you been, man?
I've been pretty good. How have you been?
Yeah, good. All right. So, well, you heard my promise there. Now we got to deliver. But first, let me establish a little bit of like street cred for you. Like, it's not like you never played D&D. I mean, you played a lot.
You cut out there.
A lot of D&D before. I mean, before we bought it. Am I back? Okay.
So try that again. Street cred was last I heard.
Yeah, street cred. Okay, so like what's your experience? You played D&D before. I mean, you know, we worked together, obviously, at Wizard of the Coast during the acquisition of TSR, but you had played D&D before then. Like what? Give us a little paragraph about what your experience with Dungeons and Dragons was as a player before.
I played with my friends since middle school, maybe elementary school, somewhere in there. Probably 79 would be the first I played. So not like a real old timer, like some people.
Right.
It's still pretty early. I think that's probably before AD&D, right around.
Right during AD&D, the Player's Handbook was out, but the Dungeon Master's Guide wasn't.
There you go. So I started before we had the Player's Handbook, but we very rapidly transitioned, I remember, into AD&D. Within the first.
Now, I always felt like a latecomer because I was never in the mode of having to play original. I shouldn't say having to play. I was never in the OD&D space, you know, for a long period. And then like, oh my God, AD&D is out, right? Oh, look at all the cool stuff they had. You know, I missed out on that. And
I was in it for a couple sessions. I mean, well, maybe a year, but whatever. I don't know. Maybe I don't know how many times we played, a dozen or so. And then when AD&D came out, then it was great because then I could buy books of my own.
Yeah.
Unlike the old one, which was just like this mystical thing that my friend had.
Right. And I seem to remember, like, because, you know, where this is leading up to, you know, we had lots of conversations about D&D throughout the process. But I seem to remember that you were involved with a group. Was it at Princeton that did a lot of house rules or its own rules system?
So, right.
D&D?
Yeah. So, I played a lot. I eventually started mostly dungeon mastering like in college. And then in college, there was a system called the Princeton system, which, again, I think that probably the rudiments of that, I'm sure, date from the 70s, but I'm not sure exactly when. And it was their own system, completely their own system. It was, you know, sort of closer to D&D than not, I think, in some of its basics, but no, it was its own thing, especially the magic system and everything like that. And that was great. That was very influential. That was a wonderful sort of system that they had there.
Did you ever like, you know, before we got the chance to work on TSR D&D together, did you ever do any experimental rules development? Did you ever do house rules for your own campaign?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, of course. Tons of house rules. I mean, yeah. Who didn't, right? I mean, that's
right.
You know, that's the beauty of it. Lots of house rules. I remember when Unearthed Arcana came out and sort of liking some of the things in that and not others. And then actually when second edition came out, I didn't like a lot of the stuff in it, but I did like some of the stuff. And so, you know, just cobbling it together. And I played with Richard Garfield in grad school. He ran a Cthulhu campaign. So that was pretty cool. and just grabbing pieces of whatever system you like and spurring on ideas for other systems.
Right. All right, so fast forward to Wizards of the Coast. Obviously we worked together. I think people who know Magic the Gathering history know that we worked together a lot back in the 90s. You, Richard Garfield, and so many other brilliant guys, mostly from University of Pennsylvania, that came out with you. And at some point in 1997, we got the opportunity to acquire TSR, and I'm trying to remember if I think that's when we started, like, in the office, just like, oh my god, we're buying D&D, we better start freaking playing D&D a lot, right? I mean, like, all this, it seemed like even before the TSR deal was done, as soon as it was like being talked about throughout the office, we were all playing D&D.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think we always had a campaign there from probably maybe even before 97 onward. And also, I don't know if you remember, but we were working on our own miniatures system that was basically Hero Quest. It wasn't really miniatures; it was really a Hero Quest style, what would you call it, role playing / miniatures game. So I know we had worked on that extensively before we even considered purchasing TSR.
Right.
Also, one thing I want to mention to everyone is, I don't know if you remember this, but you talked to me probably in 1992, maybe, or 93, and you told me that one of your life's goals was to buy TSR. I don't know if you remember that.
It sounds like something I would say, because it was certainly true, right? I mean,
okay. So that had been on your radar. I think you wanted to make at least $1 million and also buy TSR.
Yeah, something like that, right? Probably had to do one before the other.
Probably.
Yeah, well, it was something, and those types of conversations became somewhat serious, as Magic took off and we started to accumulate a lot of cash and trying to figure out how we should spend it. Certainly didn't want to just give it to the shareholders.
No, but that'd be the worst thing to do.
That'd be the worst thing to do. Absolutely.
They would have just wasted it.
Yeah, they would have just, especially, when you're running a company in your 30s, it's like the last thing. Now I would Gen Con, I'm like, okay, how can I get as much money out of this business as possible? Back then, it was like, reinvest, keep the money, reinvest. Who can we buy?
We knew all the shareholders, though, right? And they would have just wasted it. Maybe one or two wouldn't have, but they would have just been wasted.
Right. Yeah, sure. Exactly. I was trying to remember what sort of conversations we might have had before the deal, like when the deal was on the horizon. Like do you remember me coming and telling you about the TSR acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was worrisome for a lot of people. I think I probably talked to Vince about it as well, who might have been somewhat worried. Because it was so much of a passion of yours, and just like absorbing another big company and everything that's involved with that. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I know the biggest discussion was, would we keep them were they still in Lake Geneva at that time or somewhere?
Yeah.
Do we keep them there, or do we move them back over here? And how do we do the integration and all that sort of stuff? Like, I remember a lot of that sort of thing, because I know that you did not want to put people internal to Wizards in charge of stuff. Since it wasn't their expertise and would take away attention. So I think my recollection is that it was like, we're going to bring people on, a lot of people, how many people, how do we pick the good ones, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and the issue about needing the challenges of acquiring another large organization, because TSR was certainly a large organization. There was, I had a lot of conversations with Vince Calori, and for anybody watching, Vince Calori was on our board of directors. He was my mentor in business. He was a Boeing executive who was still working at Boeing at the time, although he had just retired about a year before the TSR acquisition. So like in 1996. So he was really loving retirement. And I told Vince, I said, listen, we've got to, this is a huge opportunity. Vince knew it was a big opportunity. He wasn't a gamer, but he'd always heard me talking about Dungeons and Dragons and how, you know, we'd had discussions about, well, who should we acquire as we're a growing company? And I'd always had that at the top of my list. And I told Vince, I said, listen, you've got to come out of retirement and help me come in and be my number 2 at Wizards of the Coast, because this is going to be a lot of work. I'm going to have to go out there and meet everybody, and it's going to be very hands-on. And so that it was because of the Tsr acquisition that Vince joined Wizards of the Coast, came out of retirement, and came and worked for us. And he was also on the board, so he helped to sell it.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I remember the board meeting where we pitched acquiring TSR, and and that was the biggest question, right? And so Vince is the one that really saved the deal in that way.
So you bribed the board by hiring them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good lesson for all you budding CEOs out there.
Yeah, if anybody wants to follow my social media, I'll do like, here are the top 5 ways to get your board to do what you want. Yeah, I could do an article like that. So we had so we started playing D&D, and I remember I ran a campaign for you and Richard Garfield, and let's see who else was in that. Mons, I think.
Mons, maybe Worth Wolpert. Is it possible he was in there? Andrew Finch.
Yeah, I don't remember. No. I know where Andrew Finch ran.
Richard wasn't Rich. Oh, Jim Lynn was definitely in it. Jim Lynn, yeah, and it was a bit crazy, on the crazy side. I was a bit like into power gaming, you might say. I would say a little bit, yes.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Tweet was in the game too.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
We were all humanoids.
Yes, you all play humanoids.
Was a Knoll or a something.
Yeah, Mons, of course, played a goblin.
Yeah.
That was obligatory.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Richard's character was awesome. Remember, he was that summoner guy?
Yeah. He was a demonologist.
Yeah, his character was amazing. Right. So for people that don't know, like, Peter has this chart of where you can control demons, and at lower levels, like, I don't know, 10th level or whatever, you've got a 10% chance of controlling a demon. And then Richard was like, man, I'm getting in on this. Right. And we're like, 10%, that's crazy. And then he would just go and he would start talking to the demon. He would say, look, you're immortal. I'm not. Do you really want to risk a 10% chance of being my slave? Like, that seems pretty embarrassing. How about instead we make a deal where I don't try to control you and roll the 10% chance, and instead you do a minor favor for me. And, like, I think Peter had really not been expecting that sort of thing. So as long as the deal was pretty good, we were able to engage much more powerful entities than we should have been able to, because Richard had sort of figured out that the whatever you would call it, the odds for the demon were much higher. So
he figured out the demonology scam. That's right.
He basically was, I don't think on purpose, but like, he was basically playing John Constantine.
Yeah, exactly.
For all practical purposes.
All right. So we went off and did the TSR deal, and asked, solved all those big, or address all those big questions, like, who do we hire? How do we bring people out? How do we organize, and stuff? And, I think what I want to point out here is that the relationship that you and I've always had is, I've described you as like a consigliere or something like, in my mind, I never made an important decision at Wizards of the Coast without talking to you about it. Doesn't mean I always did what you said, but but I don't know. You were always one of those. You were the rare sort of game developer, designer who thought about every aspect of the business. And so putting yourself back into us acquiring TSR and bringing that company on board, what were you concerned about? What were you thinking? What were the...
I can tell you clearly, yeah. So my primary concern for the person that was going to be running TSR was that they, or internal to Wizards, you know, once we moved over, was that they understood the potentials and, you know, the opportunities and the risks on the business side, right? Like if someone's going to talk to me about whatever, I don't know, how to shave 5% off the editing time for a book, or you know, that's on the sort of the production side, or if they're going to talk to me about a particular rules change they want here or there, that's all, I don't know, sort of minor stuff. I was much more interested in, could they see the big picture? And I gauged my interview questions that way, you know, so that's what I was looking for in those.
Right. Well, and we, you know, but we very quickly decided that, you know, I remember us having conversations about how to organize TSR, and what Wizards we already had was a brand team model with support departments. Like support departments were like art and editing and R&D and so on, with a brand team that would run the business of any particular game group. And so we decided to organize the TSR similarly to how we were organized, where we would have a Dungeons and Dragons brand team,
Sure.
a business management team.
Right.
And,
sorry if I may interject.
Yeah,
so
of course.
I think that's exactly what I was attempting to avoid in a way, in that I think that Magic was so successful because the pure R&D side really was interested in the business aspects of it, obviously from the very beginning, and then even continuing on after the original people left. Like there's lots of game decisions that turn out to be business decisions, especially for trading card games, but really for all games. So I didn't want it to be this like, oh, there's this big wall between business and R&D, and then R&D just does their stuff and turns over thing, and business does the best job they can to sell it. So I don't think I was interviewing the business side people. I may have, but I don't think so. I think it was mostly on the game side. But when I say interested in the business, I wanted someone there on the game side who could work really well with the business side people.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And we're going to get to those. I remember the interviews for the head of the creative side, and we're going to get to that. But we can talk about the business one really fast, because it was pretty fast and easy. You know, I'm not even sure if I consulted you, although I just earlier said I always did. So I must have. But you know, we put Ryan Dancy in charge of the business side, and he had a great team with Lisa Stevens and Keith Strom and Leeds Chamberlain, and you know,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the business people certainly had a lot of game experience, and so I kind of wanted to make sure the game people had some at least business sensibilities so that they could work better together.
Yeah. So we did that pretty quickly, but then, you know, the much bigger challenge, which you kind of alluded to already, that we faced in integrating this, is that we needed to figure out who was going to manage the core group of writers and editors. They used the term editor a little differently than we did at Wizards. Editors, their editors were much like what you find in book publishing, which is somebody that works with a designer and does development work and project management work and coordinates with art and graphics and cartography, big deal in TSR products. Right. And that this was a group that had to have a leader, and I was very firm that it had to be somebody from within TSR, that we're not going to put a WotC person in charge of this group. Right. And
or former TSR, right?
What's that?
Either TSR or former TSR.
Yeah.
Right, because
somebody who had history with that group,
with those people. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it had to be somebody that they would look up to and respect. And I remember us talking about it. We weren't sure who should be. And there are people whose names we're familiar with, but you're not sure what management skill they have and stuff like that. So we set up a team. And I can't remember who else was on it, but I remember you were on it because you and I would stay up and talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. And
you're still talking about the interview process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely on there. I interviewed all those people. I'm sure.
Yes.
I gave an interview question. My interview questions were hard and hypothetical, right? I mean, like for instance, what eventually turned out to be the open gaming license. I mean, I asked lots of questions around that specifically to people there in the interview process, because that's something I've been thinking about, of course. But for me, it's just an idea. Ryan's really, took it and actually did something with it. But I wanted to at least make sure the people in the interview process were like totally cool with that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, it was a challenging sort of process, right? It was we spent a lot of time on that.
We did, right? And I remember that quite well. I really like interviewing people, or smart people. I mean, I think all the candidates we brought in were good, right? I mean, it's not like I don't recall interviewing any yahoos, so it was interesting to talk with all of them.
Right. Yeah, and it ended up being a great way to get to know them a bit, and and we ended up hiring Bill Slavisek for the position. And it's funny because I think going into it, I don't think he was like the person we thought that we would.
No, I don't think so.
Hire. He's because he's very kind of a quiet sort of guy. He's kind of he's kind of an understated, but we got talk. He's a really sharp guy. I mean, he had lots of really good answers to a lot of things. He
really did. Yeah, no, I recall asking him about, right, obviously, because the old what was the Star Wars company that he did the
West End Games.
West End, yeah. And was asking him a question about D20 Star Wars, basically, even back then in the interview process. And like he was immediately like no, because and then he thought for a while, and then like you could see the gears turning, and he's like, yeah, actually, that might work. That might be a good idea. And it's, of course, not just Star Wars, but any other sort of third-party company that wants to license the system and produce things in it, going forward from that. But like you could see him actually think about the implications, industry-wide, implications for it just during that particular question. So, and it turned out, really because of Ryan's work and brilliance, like it turned out to work out really well for us, the whole open game license and the D20 system, right? I mean, I think we dominated the market for a long time, in a way that we, I think TSR had been slipping, right, for 10 years or whatever before slowly, going down. So it's good for people to see them have an open mind.
Yeah.
And then also even better to see this crazy idea work out. So.
Right. Yeah, it was. So, you were pretty, I think Ryan, of course, gets and deserves a lot of credit for D20, but you were heavily involved in sort of the early stages of brainstorming that idea.
Yeah, I would say just the early brainstorming stages, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly didn't do any work by any means.
Do you recall any sorts of discussions about it? I mean, did you ever talk to Richard Garfield about it, or other Magic guys?
I don't recall talking with Richard about it. I'm sure that at some point it was presented to him, and he immediately thought it was a great idea. The whole idea of owning the operating system basically was really something that everybody liked, sort of on the business side, but more like we always thought about things mostly in terms of the fans, right? And that helps, right? Because we have played a bazillion different role-playing game systems even by that time. And after a while, when you have access to, when you're a kid and you have access to 2 or 3, it's fun to learn a new one. And then now all of a sudden there's 100 on the market, and after a while it's like, oh my gosh, do I really have time to learn the new system? And so and then in addition, because of cobbling together all these various systems over the years, and Richard had done this for other games, but Richard was very big into game standards, right? Like, don't lay out your controller for your Xbox in a completely different way. Like, don't have the fire button be a different button than people are used to. And same thing with games. And so, so for him, it was just, use as much as possible of a standard system so that people can learn it easier, and then they only look at the changes. And I think if you're creative enough as a designer, you can really go a long way toward making minor changes off a base system, and and getting what you want, right? Like the armor systems that would take off damage instead of making you harder to hit, right? That was a big thing in the 80s.
Right.
And multiple different systems, but they're always like, oh, because that's really not the way armor works and everything like that. And it's like, well, you can just add that to the D20 system. Now, it's mostly about armor class, but it doesn't have to be. You could easily put the DR on the armor. Like it's all of these things. It's really not the system that's so important. It's how you use it and the way you manipulate it. And some of that sensibility comes from Magic the Gathering, right? Where obviously, the cards are changing stuff, even though the rule system is the same. And so we thought like we actually could make it way easier for players to play a variety of different settings, systems, that played differently with the core rules being the same. So like, that's right on. That's like Richard Garfield 101, right? Like do things normally if you can, to just, ease that burden of learning the rules. Now, if you have to change the rules, change them, right? Maybe you can't, maybe there's some game systems where you literally cannot use that base set of rules, but if you can, just go ahead and do it.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd sort of lost sight with how much you were involved in D20. Hey, Bob Kruger's on Twitch with us. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Bob is asking, was there a connection between D20 and Mike Cook's project in the early 90s, Envoy, I think it was called? Mike Cook's getting credit for, oh yeah, that's right. He was working on that for a while.
If there is, I didn't know, honestly, I hadn't heard of that until just right now. So if there was
it was. Well, okay, so you remember the Primal Order. I mean, it was before.
I do remember Primal Order,
Yeah. So Primal Order, we had this idea of that, the big strategy at Wizards before, Magic was RPGs. And because there were 100 game systems on the market, I mean, people may not realize there were already 100 game systems on the market in 1992. Now it is 20 years later and it's 100 times that many. Our strategy was not to do a game system, but was to do a lot of expansions and what we call cap systems. And so we had this project, very vainglorious, called Envoy, which was about trying to define mathematically everything that could happen in it was a doomed thing, but it was. But I think that the connection between D20, I think the through line here is this idea of having modular sort of systems that Envoy was in sense an interesting precursor to D20, but there really isn't a thread that connects them other than just a philosophy within the company that existed. And
not just inside our company, right? I mean, this isn't rocket science, right? We're not trying to cure cancer here. We're making a role-playing game. I'm sure tons of people have had the same idea. Sometimes people get so over-focused that they don't step back and think more generally. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were 100 people that had that same idea. But I wasn't paying attention to them. For me, it was more, Bill Gates and Richard Garfield and just sort of the general things more out in the world that gave some.
Yeah. So let's move into talking about third edition D&D, of course, because that's just always a fun topic for us. Do you what do you remember as some of the earliest discussions about doing a new edition of third edition, a new edition of D&D, and what we might want to do?
I remember the primary discussion, again, I'm not sure if this was with you or with Vince, but was, the business aspect of it, what happened to sales every time there was a new edition. So it's pretty clear, in order to make up for the money we spent on TSR, which was, I guess, mostly paying off their enormous debt, that we needed to launch a new edition. So that was immediately on the radar. Right. And then it's also a great opportunity, right? Because Wizards of the Coast, it's marketing power. It's not really so much the money as you're going to bring in a huge amount of new customers, given people were just curious about it. So it really kind of had to be good So I remember that. Right. It was not just crank it out. It was not just it's time for a new edition. It was, well, it's time for a new edition, but this is like a one-shot opportunity to really, really, really convince people that the purchase by Wizards was a good thing. So high stakes. I remember it being both A, required, and B, high stakes, like right in the beginning.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it had been so long since a new edition had come out, because I think second edition came out in '85, and here we are.
That early, really?
I think so. Somebody on Twitch here will look it up for us. But I think it was in '85. That's right. the year that sticks in my head. Because AD&D, of course, came out in '78-ish, depending on which book. But I think the Player's Handbook came out
I would have guessed like '87. But
yeah. But the thing is I think that second edition. Bob Kruger says '89. See, I think Bob's full of it. Bob.
No, because actually I can remember freshman year in college, Unearthed Arcana came out right around then, and so I thought second edition was after that, but I thought it was immediately after that. So I thought it would have been 87, 88. But
yeah. Okay. Well, it's the '80s then. Okay. So and the thing is that what I remember about second edition was that other games had really developed. I mean, a lot of good mechanics for role playing had been developed, and I was really looking forward to second edition AD&D when it came out. And I remember looking at it and saying, okay, that it was disappointing because I didn't feel like it really advanced the game far enough. Like it didn't. It was a chance for TSR to come out and say, no, we are the masters of this game, and here's AD&D and so in many respects, even though it hadn't come out in a long time, there hadn't been a new edition. Okay, maybe not quite as many years as I was thinking. 8 years isn't that long, I guess. But it was also not an edition that really advanced the rules that significantly from really the 1978 edition.
Sort of, I'll say, right? Because they had the skills stuff in there. What I didn't like about it was that it didn't feel like it was one game system. It felt like it was just adding crap in. It's a complicated thing, right? I think the skills system was in there, right? In that second edition.
Yeah, you had we went from non-weapon proficiencies, and you had, I think, skills. And they didn't fix the armor class. They came out with THAC0, which was a way to help,
halfway there. It's halfway there.
It was halfway there, right? And but most people I knew are playing D&D and when second edition had already flipped the AC chart upside down or it's now right side up, we would think, and
sure, and
stuff. So anyway, so so it was obvious we wanted to do a third edition of D&D right off the bat, and so we I seem to recall we had some discussions about what we would do differently, like what sort of interesting mechanics we would put in there, like.
Absolutely.
Anything you remember?
So one thing is we had worked so much with essentially that Warhammer Quest game, where those are really stripped down rules. I say Warhammer Quest, it was completely unbranded. It was just in the style of a Warhammer Quest game, where like, what are the rogue's powers, and what's how do you backstab? How do you determine what a backstab is? People now don't even, flanking is such a common thing now, but remember that didn't exist back then. How a simple way to determine, you got to be on opposite sides, right. And all those sorts of things, and especially from playing so many miniatures games, once you went to the miniatures setup, it was difficult to have the miniatures be useful because people just move wherever they wanted to move. So things like attacks of opportunity and flanking and various sort of like kind of almost automatic things like, the rogue has high perception, is sneaky, so it gets a bonus to perception or whatever. All of those types of things that we had taken from that miniatures game, we then I absolutely wanted them transported into D&D because those were really I think important for making it tactically interesting on the board. If people don't want to play with the board, they don't have to. But if they're going to play with the board, give them the system that actually, has some meat to it, and it's not just put your guys wherever you want to put them. So all of that came, really from the Wizards' efforts, before we even purchased TSR. And then the big thing though is from the sensibilities of like card game design. The thing that bothered me the most about second edition was how unsystematic it was. Like, it's good ideas, but it's kind of random. The skill system didn't fit with the other stuff. And so just trying to systematize everything, including the spells. I'm sure we'll get to that story later, right? You would get descriptions of spells where you just didn't know what the hell they did. And like, you just weren't sure. And it was up to the DM, and that's okay. But there's a lot of burden on the DM to just kind of make crap up, because it was so hard, to have to make a ruling every time any player wanted to do something. So systematizing it so that people would know, what was going on. Same thing had to happen with Magic cards, right? The very, very, very first Magic cards, Richard was a little bit loose with the language. And so just to say, like, just trying to standardize the language, what we call templating and trading cards today. Again, like, I feel like I'm talking to people, they don't have any idea what I'm talking about, because almost all games are like this now. But if you played games in 1983, that's not how they were. They were just written kind of in English, right? And then, like, you play WizWar, and sometimes things work this way and sometimes not, and you didn't know where it was going, or D&D, everything was that way. There was no like sense of the card. Actually, we have taken, as the publisher, enough care that when we write something, we mean it. That was not the case. I mean, like, very, very, very few games were written where the rules were.
Yeah, and I mean, and what an example of that is just being very conscious of what words mean. What is the word for this? What is the word for that? Right, and always using that word, the same word or the same thing in each instance, and never using some different word for that thing, right? And then even templating in terms of sentence structure, like Magic the Gathering is very consistent, this colon that, right? Do this thing and get this benefit, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that people, I know we got a lot of pushback early on when we were doing Magic that way. The editors eventually became ridiculously awesome and caught much of our mistakes, but like, initially it's jarring, right, to have to shoehorn everything into that, because this is not what you're used to from normal English editing. Like, oh yeah, we're trying to make this as boring as absolutely possible. And even making individual, and the other thing is, no one's used to editing 1,000 or 10,000 card set. So it's in Magic, there are cards that are written less clear than they would be otherwise if it was the only card in existence, but it matches another set of cards. So your general knowledge helps you figure out what that one's supposed to be. And the same thing with D&D spells, right? Some spells might be written a little bit clearer on their own, but if you follow the same format, then everyone knows what's going on. At first, it may seem like for the player, it's more boring, but it's a huge help to them in these modular systems, like you're saying, because then, yeah, maybe the first 10 cards or 10 spells you read don't read as well as they could. But by the time you get to your 50th or 100th or 200th spell, you're so thankful that people wrote them in a standard way.
Right, exactly. So hey, one thing I remember, I want to talk about with you a little bit, see if you remember. I remember a lot of discussion about how whether D&D should be dumbed down or how complicated should it be, and it was a pet peeve that I had that people kept calling third edition a much more complicated a complicated game, and I used to say, no, it's not more complicated than AD&D. AD&D just didn't look complicated because they just hid a lot of the stuff where you couldn't find it, and so you could read along and think, well, this isn't too hard, but that's because all the little tricksy things are hidden away somewhere. And I think in third edition, our philosophy was, we're going to bring all this stuff right up to the front, organize it, template it, and make it easier to find.
Yeah, I mean, just respect the player and respect the DM. Make it easy for them to play properly. And that doesn't mean they have to play the same way. They can make house rules all they want and change things that they want, but at least they know what the base is. They have an idea. They don't have to, it's not constantly making crap up on the fly. So I think it's much easier to play 3rd edition properly than it was to play AD&D properly.
Oh my God. I went through and tried to figure out the rules in AD&D for combat and surprise with weapon speeds and all that stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And it is, but I found, I gave up trying to do it, but I found there's a guy that did do it. He's got like it's like a 15-page document with page number references from whether it's DMG, Player's Handbook, or whatever. If you ever want to play AD&D exactly how the rules claimed, you should.
Yeah,
we can do that sometimes now.
And the thing is that, so here's another thing is people, and this comes from card game sensibilities, people say, well, like, why do I need to play properly? Well, the thing is, again, if you remember from the 1980s, you could play in your group, and when you went to another group, it was kind of hard. You certainly couldn't take characters back and forth. I mean, obviously, but like just even playing and learning how the new group was playing and what it even meant. If you said, "Oh, I've got a 5th level dwarf fighter," I don't know, that just meant different things to different people, really, And so, it really helped people. And this was another part of the vision, right? Is we wanted people to play with each other, right? The whole idea of the RPGA, certainly what there wasn't, fully formed, but like we wanted to expand it. We wanted it to make it a lot more like Magic. We wanted people to be able to play at conventions easier with each other, all that sort of stuff. All this sort of stuff's hard with AD&D. And so like, I understand people might complain and say like, oh gosh, do we all have to play the same way? It's like, there's a lot of benefits for it,
Right.
So.
So we you mentioned the spell list earlier in 3rd edition.
So people in the audience, a lot of you think of Peter as a nice guy. That's because you've never seen him work on the 3rd edition design steering team, because he flipped out. I mean, he got mad. Like, the scene in The Untouchables with Al Capone, teamwork. Baseball bat. That's like how mad he was. So
Skaff, I've worked so hard to
we were doing a play test.
Cover that up. I'm going to get canceled.
We were doing a play test. We had to get the play test document out to people. And there's a fairly tight deadline, and the spells were, and so I forget who all was on the team. It was Jonathan Tweed and Skip Williams and Rich Baker and
Monty Cook,
and there may have been another person.
No, that's it.
That's it.
Well, yeah, Rich left the team, I think, shortly after Jonathan joined. Something may have gone askew there. I'm not sure.
So I don't think. Okay, so those people, I will say this right now, they did a great job. However, I don't think they respected your design ability, and and you have a really good design sensibility. I mean, anyway, you really do. So we get this test document, and it's about to go out to the public, and it's terrible. I mean, first of all, we had been telling them for a long time about templating the spells. Like, got to template the spells, got to template the spells, got to template the spells. And they just didn't do it. It was not done. Or maybe they tried to do it, but I'm going to just give them credit for it. They didn't do it. Anyway, because they're busy, whatever. So we totally understood that. We weren't even mad about that. We're like, okay, we got to correct this. And in fact, inside the spell list, there were like clear copy paste errors. There were spells that literally made no sense. Like, I don't know what it was. Fireball was under the description for Cone of Cold or whatever the hell it was. But there were like just copy paste errors as they tried to put all this together. So we're like, man, this is unacceptable. And they're like, hey, sorry, it's got to go out by a certain time. And so we said, well, what if we did it? Right. And they were like, well, what do you mean? There's, it's got to go out, whatever, tomorrow or the next day or whatever it was. And we're like, well, we can do it. It's like, oh, there's I don't know how many spells there were, 500 spells or whatever.
Right.
So we said, no, we'll do it. And so we said, we'll just stay up all night and do it. And Peter and I stayed up in his office all night, I think for 2 nights, right? I think it was two nights.
It's a 2 or 3 day project. Yeah.
And we're just constantly, we just didn't leave the office, like go to the bathroom.
Yep.
Sometimes.
Order out.
Sometimes just went in the corner. And it was just like, and we just went through all the spells, and Peter put in so much work. Now, remember, this is the president of the company who is doing all this extra work for 3 days straight so that the document can be done in time. So we turn it over according to the deadline that they gave us. No problem, right? So like, okay, there were still 2 days left for editing. So then we get the documents that are about to be sent out, and the changes weren't made. And we sat in that room, and they said, oh yeah, well, we reviewed them, and some of them we weren't sure about, didn't make sense. And then I flipped to the copy paste error. Like, this didn't make sense. Like, this copy paste error, like, you reviewed our changes. Like, they didn't even look at them, didn't even glance at them. And that's when Peter absolutely lost it. He just started screaming and yelling, and like, totally good reason. It's like, really, your president stays up for 3 days or 2 days in a row, and you can't even fix a copy paste error that he's pointed out to you after 2 days of editing. So then when there were changes made to the team after that, I believe. Yeah. Jonathan got elevated. Before, there wasn't a head of the team, maybe, or something.
Yeah. It's
Jonathan in charge, right?
Yeah. We had to.
Some people left the team.
Yeah. It was transformative. But it was a lot of fun too. Working on the spells. I remember those.
It was fun.
It was fun. I remember. There was something. I remember the meetings with the team where we'd meet out on these couches, and sometimes I'd fall asleep because they were so long.
Yeah.
But I also remember, and by the way, thanks for reminding me about the miniatures, not to go back to that, but I really had forgotten that you had played such an instrumental role in the rules, like reach rules and flanking rules.
The reach and the flanking and attacks of opportunity and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that was all me. Yeah.
That was all, stuff that was very, very important to that. And then I remember
the clerics having the domain spells. I know other people had that idea, totally, but that's like I pushed for that before the project even started, because in PrinceCon, the different religions of clerics had just completely different spell lists. So this was sort of like halfway in between those.
Yeah.
And I remember, was it Julia? Was she maybe doing the clerics? She was like totally on board with it. I remember that she had that idea independently. And so that was great, like to actually see the clerics be different from each other, right? Which they weren't in previous editions.
Yeah, she was very into that.
Yeah. It was awesome. Yeah. That was, I got her name right? Is it? Does it sound
Julia Martin.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah. So it was really cool.
Yeah. She was, I always remember her fondly because when I first met her, she told me that she'd read the Primal Order and thought it was great. And
Yeah, it would sort of felt like she was so into that. When I first suggested that to people, I mean, probably the design team, they're like, oh, I don't know, that doesn't sound like a good idea. But, well, you need to talk to Julia because, she knows clerics and blah, blah. And they were just expecting her to say no, right? And then she was like, awesome, right? Like, make them feel different. So it's probably one of these cases where this person, she probably had this idea for 10 years and wanted to do it, but that wasn't the rules, so she couldn't. Yeah.
So let's try to undo some of the damage of how angry I was at the team, and but the team, Jonathan, Skip, and Monty and Rich came up with a lot of great stuff.
It was awesome. Right. Yeah. It was awesome. The anger wasn't at what they were doing. The anger was at, even if they had said, Peter, we don't have time to look at it. Sorry, it has to go out. Well, you probably would have just extended the deadline. But even if they had said that, you wouldn't have been mad at all. It was literally just them not looking at your work. Right. I think that's kind of a minor thing. I mean,
right.
But no,
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember some of the there was so many good things that came out. There was I thought that Jonathan's solution for multi-classing was brilliant. Now I know that there ended up being some problems because there was such a plethora of different systems, and that maybe we didn't nail it out of the gate. But the idea that some bits and pieces of class levels you could just add on, and then there'd be some of your abilities would depend upon a character level, right? So like you had a character level that was the sum of all your class levels,
right?
And
it's great.
Great. It solved so many problems with like in AD&D you had multi-class characters and characters with 2 classes, right?
Yes, which are different. Yeah, it doesn't quite, I don't think anyone's ever quite worked it out well for spellcasters. I mean, I think that, since I've never seen a good way to do that, it was maybe as good as other systems before, but for non-spellcasters, it was just great. It was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
So, there were so many good things. I mean, the other thing too is just the sheer amount of work that they had to put in to do that, right? Like it meshed together really well, and I think it worked out really well. And so it's like, other than that one not looking at your thing.
Well, and they've gone on to have really great careers. Monty especially has done a great job with his own company, with his D20 stuff, and that's advanced into other realms. And it was a great highlight for Jonathan and his and I had Skip, of course, and Skip. I've had all 3 of them on the show, and Skip is always just great to chat with. He's I always was just thought it was cool to have. I mean, I grew up reading Dragon magazine, and he was the sage in Dragon magazine, and he was so young. He started working on. He was a teenager back when he started,
right? Well, he was a repository of a lot of old knowledge. Like there's a lot of really things that look stupid in 1st and 2nd editions, right? But then Skip would say like, oh, the reason we did this was because of blah. And it was actually a really good reason, right? So like, I remember some discussions about that sort of thing with him. And so then once maybe the rule doesn't work out quite as well, or why is the spell using D4s instead of D8s or whatever. But then when you unpack the reasoning, like, you can then recreate that in the new rule system. So
yeah.
No, he knows an incredible amount of that kind of stuff. So it was really good. And it was really fun to play. 3rd edition was really fun to play. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with it, right? Some of which have been fixed. Some of the good things have been fixed too, but that's how it goes.
I think if I had to look back, I think if we'd have had one more year of development on it, I guess, of course, we would have fixed some of these problems. But you needed ultimately a spreadsheet to manage your character, because you'd have like, oh, here's a spell that affects your wisdom, and so now you got your wisdom bonus changes, and now it goes through and affects all your spells, and
right.
The dynamic linking between stats and things that depended on stats was just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it was a little bit hard. I mean, I think the biggest problem was demanding that the monsters work the same way the characters worked. I think that was for the biggest single problem, because it just made it harder for the dungeon master.
So Derek's asking us how involved we were in 3.5. I don't think we really were, right? I think that was...
No, I mean, I was. I mean, I was certainly consulted on a lot of stuff there. 3.5, some of the changes I was for, some I was against. I think at least one of the changes I was against, I was just wrong. Like it was just better. I think it was the large creatures taking up 4 squares. But like, I mean, so we're a little bit involved. I mean, I certainly still talked with all the people then and was.
We only have a few minutes left. Is there like some story that you're itching to get out, or I can just ask you something like, well, what do you think of 5th?
I like fifth edition. I think that it's more, I mean, I would like it if it were a little bit meatier. I mean, I didn't really like, well, first of all, I like all role-playing game systems. I'll have fun in every single one. I've played 4th edition campaigns, 5th edition campaigns, Pathfinder campaigns, Burning Wheel campaigns. Like I love them all. So remember, that's the baseline. But I liked 4th edition a lot less than I did 3rd. So I think 5th is better than 4th for sure. I think somewhere halfway between 5th edition and 3.5 would be like perfect.
Yeah. I think it's I've been running fifth edition. I mean, actually for like a year now. So I haven't run anything real high level. I've been just going through the levels kind of slowly, and I'm up to like 8th level character now, I think, with my party. And what caught me off guard was like how powerful first level characters are, right? With the if this is a curve, with a slope, the y-intercept is ratcheted up, but the slope is less. I mean, like first level characters are way more powerful, but the increase in power is less extreme.
And I'll say I have one huge bugaboo about 5th edition. The best part about 5th edition is advantage and disadvantage. It is awesome. It's awesome. Like it's like one of the truly like really good innovations in 20 years or 30 years or whatever. Right. However, they screwed it up because it should be continuing. If you get advantage for multiple reasons or disadvantage for multiple reasons, they should stack, roll 4 dice and take the best one. And it bugs me so much that doesn't happen because the system is so brilliant. It can actually handle multiple conditions. And then people are like, oh, well, that's too rules lawyery or something, because then you get multiple advantages, and if you do that, then you're maximizing everything and min-maxing. I'm like, no, it's the opposite, you freaking morons. First of all, like you get this sort of like logarithmically increasing value for it. Like if obviously you don't want to have 50 advantages, you'd much rather have 2 and then spread them out over multiple battles. So there's no like broken part about the rule system. And even worse, it's anti-role playing, right? I've got a character. I build my character. My character blinds people, right? Oh, I'm the cleric of darkness, right? And then somebody trips the big monster. The monster's on the ground. I don't want to be like, I mean, in real life, like if I'm role playing, of course I should blind him. Why wouldn't I blind him? Well, no, sorry. You don't want to blind him. It's to give you extra advantage. It's anti-role playing. That's the biggest problem I have with it. I'm sorry, I'm going off. And it's also inherently limiting. It's not min-maxing to just let the advantages and disadvantages stack up. It's crazy.
Right. Because like, okay, if you go from 2d20 to best of 3d20, I mean, at some point, you're going to be rolling somewhere in the high teens, no matter what. So who cares, right? I mean, the highest you can roll is a 20, and you can do that with 1 die. So, yeah.
It's really startling that both the rule and most importantly, the role-playing thing, like you want to trip people, you want to blind people, of course, all those extra things hurt them. Just do them, and they add a little bit to it. You don't even have to think about it.
Right.
Anyway.
Awesome. Well, there we go. We got a first class Skaff rant there to close this out there. So hey Skaff, I've got like a final question for you real quick before we stop, because I've got a nice esoteric touchy-feely question.
Yeah.
You're just gonna love it.
Love
right?
Those.
Yeah, you love those, right? You're so in touch with your feelings. What when you look back at that time, I mean, working on D&D, I mean, holy cow. I mean, working on Magic the Gathering and D&D, our time that we worked together in the 90s, what do you take from that? Like when you look back at that, like what is it that you look back at and reminisce about, or proud of, or have brought with you into your life now?
So first of all, if I can touch my feelings, I can grab them. If I can get a hold of my feelings, it's bad for my feelings. They're in a lot of trouble. So I'm not really, my feelings have learned to stay out of my touch. Yeah. Anyway, what grabs me, I mean, I just had so much fun because it felt like there was these unique opportunities from getting people together on the business side, like you and Vince, and then on the TSR side, with all their knowledge, and then on the magic side, like Richard's sensibilities, and you could just synthesize all these things into making like really just a better product for the customer. I mean, something that lots of people could play. And obviously it's not perfect. There's a million things wrong with everything you do, but it felt like there was this coming together of stuff. So it was easy to, to synthesize something into a great product. And it was just so fun to work on. Just so fun. It was fun working with you. And again, I think I've told people this a lot. People think of you more as a business person, but really you're kind of as much or more of a product person. Like your sensibilities there are good. I think that's really helped you in the business stuff that you've done, is that you kind of know what's good and what's bad on the product side. So that was the only time really you and I really worked together on a game, right?
Yeah. We worked together here and there on Magic, but you guys were, I never caught up really,
Right. You had other stuff. You had important things to do.
Yeah.
That you put on hold for third edition because D&D is your thing, or role playing games, but D&D is your thing since you were whatever. I don't know.
And I had Vince.
Yeah, that's right. He could do some business stuff. So it was just sort of magical. I mean, like getting all the people together, and it was great.
Right.
Really.
All right. Well, thank you, Skaff, for coming in today. All right, I got my little outro thing here. So stick around. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll stick around.
Okay. That wraps up another episode of Fireside with Peter Adkison. Our guest next week will be Keith Strom. Yeah, that's right, Keith Strom. He's been absent from the scene for a number of years, but we are dragging him back in for this. Can't wait to catch up with him. In the meantime, there is plenty of cool stuff to watch on Gen Con TV. Today, right here after the show, we have a Fantasy Grounds demo with Fantasy Grounds Focal Course on how to use Fantasy Grounds and how to be at Gen Con online. Friday, 2 p.m., of course, we have Table Takes. 3:30 p.m., we have the Gen Con online info for Astral, another demo. And then at 5 p.m., another demo for Tabletopia. So a lot of our programming right now is getting ready for Gen Con Online. So come and learn the scoop. Next week on Monday, the Brothers Murph will be back for Board Games with the Murphs. And then Wednesday next week at 11 a.m., Board Games again with This Game Gets Dicey. And then Wednesday at 4 p.m. next week, it's back to me, Fireside with Keith Strom. So if you miss any of our shows, you can find all of our streams about a day or so later on our Gen Con Video YouTube channel, including all the episodes we filmed searching for untold stories behind Magic the Gathering, of which Skaff is on 2 of those episodes. So
on 2?
Yeah, okay. You can twice. Yeah, you were a little slow on the second one. The first one was really good. And then also our episodes are available for in podcast form. So please remember, follow, subscribe, turn on notifications, tell your friends. Thanks once again to our guests, Skaff Elias, also our studio manager, Marcus Mays, our streaming manager, Lauren Bond, our producer, Derek Gooder, and to Gen Con TV for hosting us. But most of all, thanks to you for watching.
All right, thanks.